The sky tore open like a wound that would never heal. It wasn't lightning, nor fire, nor anything the people of the valley had seen before. It shimmered a line of molten light carving through the heavens, pulsing like a living vein. For hours, the glow refused to fade. When morning came, the world smelled of iron and ash, and at the heart of the plains lay something no eye had ever known. The stone was enormous, yet alive with quiet motion. Faint ripples of light danced beneath its black surface, as if trapped suns were trying to escape. The air around it hummed, not with sound, but with vibration, an invisible tension that made the skin tighten, the mind blur, and the earth seem weightless for a moment. The shepherds who found it couldn't step closer. Their thoughts thinned, scattered like smoke. By noon, the elders arrived. They covered their faces with ash, murmuring prayers to the gods of thunder and sky. They believed the message had fallen from the heavens, a warning perhaps, or a gift. The youngest among them dared to touch the stone's surface. He felt warmth, then cold, then nothing at all. For the rest of the day, he spoke to no one. His eyes looked through the living as if they were made of glass. At dusk, something strange happened. The ground around the stone began to pulse faintly, like the rhythm of a distant heart. Dust rose, forming slow spirals that glowed under the dying light. Birds refused to fly near. The wind refused to blow. A silence too heavy to belong to the earth settled across the plains. And within that silence, there was a hum deep, rhythmic, ancient, like the memory of a voice too old to belong to humankind. Some swore they saw shapes moving beneath the stone's translucent veins. Figures not made of flesh, but of energy, of light folded into forms that almost resembled thought. Others said the stone was not from the gods, but from something beyond them, a realm where divinity was born and forgotten. When the first night fell after the impact, stars disappeared. Only the wound in the sky remained faint, scarred but breathing. The villagers lit fires and waited for a sign. None came. But in the middle of the night, when the world seemed still, the stone gave a pulse, slow, deliberate, like the first beat of a sleeping heart, remembering how to wake. By the second sunrise, the ground had begun to change. The soil nearest to the fallen stone had turned glassy, as if kissed by lightning. Dew refused to settle on it, and plants near the edge bent away, their stems twisting as if pushed by invisible hands. At dawn, a faint mist clung to the air, carrying with it a metallic scent that stung the lungs and lingered on the tongue. The villagers built a wooden barrier around the impact site. They spoke in whispers now, as though any louder word might wake the thing that slept beneath that dark shell, yet none could stay away for long. Every few hours someone would wander back, drawn by an ache behind the eyes, a pull too ancient to be named. The youngest children began to dream of light swirling, fluid, endless light, and in the mornings they woke with tiny burns on their palms. When night came again, the hum returned. It wasn't constant, but rhythmic, almost alive. Birds called once, then went silent. Dogs howled, then lay flat against the earth. The sound didn't move through the air, but through bone, through thought. Those who stood closest to the barrier said they could feel it in their teeth. Some claimed it whispered to them, though no words could be understood, only feelings, longing, grief, and something that tasted like recognition. 3 nights after the fall, the stone changed color. Under the pale moon, veins of blue light began to slither across its surface like frost creeping over glass. The ground trembled. Shallow cracks spread outward in perfect geometric lines, tracing symbols that seemed deliberate. Someone compared them to ancient runes carved on temple stones, patterns said to bind power to the earth. But no priest or scholar could read them. At the village's edge, the eldest woman, blind since birth, began to speak in her sleep. Her words were foreign, unearthly, shaped like wind through hollow bone. The next morning she was silent, but her fingers bore the same blue glow that now pulsed beneath the stone. When they tried to wash it away, the glow sank deeper beneath her skin and followed the rhythm of her heartbeat. By the fifth day, rain fell thick, heavy, almost luminous. It hissed when it touched the glassy soil, releasing faint curls of steam. Those who dared to stand beneath it said it tasted sweet, like memory itself. In the distance, thunder echoed, but the sky remained clear. And then, in that strange half-light between storm and silence, the stone exhaled. Not wind, not heat, but something unseen, something that brushed against every living thing like the passing of a thought. Trees leaned toward it, and shadows stretched the wrong way. The villagers felt their hearts skip, not out of fear, but out of awe. The breath faded. The mist thickened, and somewhere deep beneath the plains, a second heartbeat answered. No one slept that night. The rain had stopped, yet its rhythm lingered in their minds, echoing faintly in the spaces between thoughts. The villagers stayed indoors, listening to the hum that now seemed to pulse beneath the ground rather than above it. Some said it was the earth breathing, others said it was their own hearts, caught in the stone's rhythm, beating in time with something far older than life itself. By morning, the world felt slightly tilted. Shadows stretched at impossible angles. Birds no longer followed the wind but circled in erratic patterns, as if lost between directions. A thin layer of frost coated the soil despite the warmth of the season. The villagers found that compasses refused to point north. The needle trembled, spinning endlessly before settling toward the fallen stone, as though declaring it the new pole of existence. On the seventh day, light began to behave differently. It bent near the crater, slow and syrupy, thick enough that it seemed to hang in the air before dissolving. When one of the shepherds walked too close, his shadow split in two. For a heartbeat, he saw both versions of himself, one still, one breathing before collapsing to his knees. He said he'd felt himself drift apart, one self sinking into the earth while the other floated above it, staring down. He didn't speak again. Strange symbols began to appear on the villager's skin, faint blue threads that glowed in darkness like veins of trapped starlight. Some hid them, terrified. Others, gathered by the crater, kneeling in the glassy soil, arms lifted to the stone as if in worship. The hum grew deeper each night, vibrating not in the air but in their bones. It was no longer sound. It was thought, one that did not belong to them. Dreams became corridors. Sleep offered no rest. They saw visions of vast fields of black water, of silver storms sweeping through silent cities. They dreamed of figures woven from pure light, faceless and endless, staring back from the other side of the sky. In these dreams, the stone was not a thing that fell. It was a thing that returned, a fragment, a memory, a relic pulled home by the weight of its own creation. The blind woman began to speak again, but this time her words flowed like water running backward. When the villagers tried to silence her, the ground beneath her chair trembled. Her voice deepened, echoing not from her mouth, but from the stone itself. And then, for a brief moment, all sound died. The air hung still. Every heartbeat stopped, not in pain, but in surrender. The hum ceased, replaced by a vibration too subtle to hear, yet impossible not to feel. In that silence, something changed. The stone cracked open, not with violence, but with grace, as if peeling itself apart willingly. Light poured out, not bright but soft liquid, the color of deep ocean. It rolled across the plains, swallowing shadows and reflection alike. When it touched the villagers, it didn't burn, it remembered. Each of them saw flashes of things that could not be theirs. Towers made of glass and thunder, oceans above the sky, faces carved from starlight. They fell to their knees. Some wept, some laughed, some simply stared, eyes hollow and shining, their pupils reflecting a sky that no longer existed. When the light dimmed, the stone stood hollow, a shell of itself, breathing faintly. From within, a faint pulse continued, like the echo of a voice too vast to understand. At the edge of the crater, the eldest man whispered, "It's awake," but no one answered him, for in that moment, every villager realized the truth they could not speak aloud. The stone hadn't come from the heavens. It had been buried deep within the earth, waiting, and now something had called it back to the surface. The hum, returned that night, slower this time, heavier. It moved like the tide beneath their dreams, dragging thoughts toward the same dark current. And though the stars flickered faintly overhead, none dared look up because they feared they might see something staring back. Days began to lose their meaning. The sun still rose, but its warmth no longer reached the skin. Time drifted in uneven loops, stretching, recoiling, repeating. The villagers forgot which day followed which. The roosters crowed at dusk. The rivers flowed backward for moments at a time before settling again into silence. The world had not broken, it was remembering something older, something it had once been before men learned to name it. The stone pulsed in the heart of the crater, slow and steady, the second sun buried beneath the earth. Each beat sent faint ripples through the soil, and wherever they passed, color drained from the ground. Grass turned ashen, trees faded to silhouettes. Even the air seemed paler, thinner, as if light itself was being consumed to feed the thing below. At night, the villagers saw reflections in the sky, ghostly shapes, gliding among the stars, mirroring the land below. A mountain of light hung upside down in the heavens, identical to the range that framed their valley. For every flicker of flame on earth, another shimmered above. The villagers whispered that the sky had become a mirror to the stone's dream. Then came the first disappearance. The shepherd's daughter, a quiet girl who had never spoken since the night of the fall, walked toward the crater at dawn. She crossed the barrier as though it wasn't there. When they ran after her, she was gone. Only her footprints remained, glowing faintly for a few breaths before fading into dust. The air smelled of rain, though no cloud lingered. The elders marked her loss as a sacrifice to appease whatever power slept within the stone. But the next night, they all dreamed of her standing in the light, smiling, her skin carved with constellations. More followed, not taken but drawn. The hum called them one by one. Children, the sleepless, the curious. They walked as though guided by invisible hands. Those who stayed behind began to lose their sense of distance, of place. Voices echoed where there were no walls. Reflections moved a moment slower than the bodies that cast them. In water, they saw landscapes that didn't belong to this world, cities half sunk in luminous fog, temples that breathed, statues weeping molten gold. The elders tried to burn the stone. They brought oil and wood, chanting names of gods older than their language. Flames licked the crater, yet nothing caught fire. The heat bent around it, folding in on itself, vanishing into the blue glow beneath. The fire died, and in its ashes, they saw patterns, the same geometric veins that had spread across the soil. Except now, they pulsed in rhythm with their own hearts. On the 10th night, the blind woman awoke screaming. Her eyes, once white and clouded, shone bright as sapphire. She spoke words that cracked the air, not in sound but in resonance. The ground quivered, and every reflective surface, every pool, every shard of glass, every glint of metal shimmered with images of the same place. A vast chamber of light, filled with floating stones, each one whispering to the other in tongues of thunder. And then, all at once, the hum ceased. For a full minute there was only silence. The air hung thick, expectant. Even the insects stopped their endless chorus. When the sound returned, it was not a hum, it was a chord, a deep harmonic vibration that made bones ache and hearts tremble. It felt like remembering a word you were never supposed to know. The villagers fell to the ground, covering their ears, but it didn't matter, the sound was inside them, threading through thought and blood alike. Those who survived that night spoke later of visions, a sky splitting open to reveal not darkness, but light folded into spirals, a river that flowed upward, carrying reflections of faces not yet born, and above it all, a single, burning eye that did not see but remembered. When dawn returned, the crater was empty. The stone was gone. Only a hollow impression remained, its surface smooth as glass, still warm to the touch. The villagers gathered, dazed, unable to speak, and from far beyond the mountains, faint thunder rolled across a cloudless sky. The absence of the stone was heavier than its presence had ever been. The crater remained, vast and gleaming, a mirror that refused to reflect the sky. When the wind passed over it, the sound curved, swallowing itself. Birds dared not cross the circle. Clouds broke apart before drifting above it. The villagers gathered each morning at its edge, hoping the light might return. Yet what they saw instead was a shimmer, an afterimage, faint and trembling, as though the stone's memory still floated in the air. Days stretched thin. The seasons hesitated. Rain fell in brief, perfect spirals, vanishing before touching the earth. The crops stood motionless, neither dying nor growing. The villagers began to forget their own names, replacing them with sounds that felt truer, simpler. A man might answer to the sigh of wind through leaves, a woman to the hum that trembled in her chest at night. Their language bent, reshaped by the vibration that lingered beneath all things. At night, light returned not from the heavens, but from the ground. Thin lines of blue fire traced the soil, threading through roots, water, and bone. When they reached the houses, the walls pulsed faintly, breathing with the rhythm of something unseen. The villagers didn't panic. They simply listened, lulled by the cadence of the world remembering itself. Sleep became sacred, dreams became maps. Each dream carried fragments of the same landscape, an ocean of stone, a sun buried beneath waves of glass, voices calling from within light itself. One morning, the youngest boy awoke to find his shadow missing. Where it should have fallen, there was only a faint outline glowing like frost. He felt lighter, hollowed, yet full of warmth. Others soon followed. Shadows peeled away from their owners, gathering at the crater's edge. They stood there at dusk, silent silhouettes, flickering like candle smoke, waiting. No one dared to approach. When dawn came, they were gone, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and rain. The elders began to speak of balance, that perhaps the stone had not vanished but dissolved, returning to the fabric of existence. Everything it touched, one whispered, remembers the sound. Indeed, the world hummed constantly now, too faint to notice until silence made it unbearable. The hum moved through every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every thought that brushed against fear. Far beyond the valley, travelers reported strange phenomena. Rivers that glowed beneath the moon, mountains that whispered when the air grew still, a storm that hovered unmoving above the sea, its lightning flashing in patterns like script. Scholars tried to measure these events, but instruments failed. Compasses spun, clocks skipped seconds, then hours. The very concept of direction began to fray. And yet, amid the confusion, beauty emerged. The sky at night shimmered with unfamiliar constellations, new stars that no one could name. Some claimed they were the same symbols once etched across the crater's soil, now transposed into the heavens. Others said the gods had rewritten the sky to remind humankind of the bargain they had forgotten to fear. The blind woman's body, which had lain still for days, was found standing at the crater's center. Her eyes were open, glassy, reflecting the stars even under daylight. Her skin shimmered faintly with blue lines that pulsed in time with the earth's rhythm. When they touched her, she was warm, yet lifeless, as though her pulse had merged with something deeper, something planetary. Then, without warning, the hum deepened once more. The ground trembled. The crater filled with light not blinding but infinite, a presence rather than a brightness. The villagers fell to their knees. They saw no stone, no figure, no god, only the echo of what had been, repeating itself like a thought that refused to fade. When the light finally dimmed, nothing had changed. The sky still hung gray, the valley still silent. But those who stood at the crater's edge swore they could feel the pulse in their chests shift slightly, sinking once again to a rhythm not their own. Far away, in temples built before memory, bells began to ring of their own accord. The sound traveled across mountains, deserts, and seas, a low resonant tone calling out to something unseen. And in that endless vibration, the world seemed to breathe, as if waiting for an answer that had already begun. Sleep became a threshold. Those who drifted into it no longer closed their eyes, they opened them to another version of the same world. In that place, the valley stretched endlessly, and the crater pulsed like a second moon embedded in the soil. People saw each other there, moving through the same dream as though they shared a single thought. The air shimmered like glass bending under heat, and when they spoke, their words became visible thin ribbons of light that coiled around them before dissolving into the wind. The dreams began to merge, each night blurred into the next, each vision feeding the next awakening. Some villagers started to lose their distinction between sleep and waking life. They walked through the valley as if still dreaming, their eyes reflecting images that weren't there, mountains inverted in the sky, rivers flowing upward, stars flickering inside their pupils. The boundary between thought and matter dissolved. They could feel the hum even when they held their breath, vibrating in the marrow of their bones. Soon dreams began to alter the land. The river that once cut through the valley split in two directions, defying its own gravity. Trees grew transparent, their roots glowing faintly beneath the soil, connecting in patterns that resembled constellations. When lightning struck, it moved horizontally across the sky, tracing symbols that only the dreamers seemed to understand. One morning, a boy awoke to find that his hand passed through the wall beside his bed, as if the world had forgotten its solidity. The wood rippled, soft as mist, before hardening again. He screamed, but the sound came out delayed, echoing several seconds after his mouth had closed. The villagers gathered, fearful yet fascinated. The boy's eyes glowed faintly, and when he looked toward the crater, the hum intensified, rippling outward like a wave through the ground. By now, no one questioned what was real. They only observed. A woman saw her reflection in a bowl of water and realized it wasn't her own. It was smiling when she was not. Another swore she heard the voices of her ancestors speaking through the wind, whispering words that carried both comfort and warning. In the distance, the mountains trembled faintly, releasing clouds of fine dust that glimmered in the sunlight like falling ash. The hum changed tone. It began to pulse with rhythm, rising and falling in slow cadence. It was no longer a background sound. It was a language, a structure, an order the world seemed eager to obey. When the villagers stood still, they could feel their hearts sinking with it, adjusting unconsciously. Those who resisted grew pale and weak, as if drained by something unseen. Those who surrendered seemed serene, distant, their movements fluid and slow, like they were being guided by unseen currents. The elders gathered again, or what remained of them. They tried to remember the old prayers, the names of the gods, but every word felt hollow, stripped of meaning. "We were not meant to understand this," one whispered. "We were meant to feel it." Another nodded, staring toward the crater. "Maybe this is what the gods felt when they first created the world." That night, the blind woman appeared once more, standing at the edge of the valley. Her skin shimmered with lines of soft light moving beneath her flesh like rivers of energy. She raised her arms, and for the first time the hum answered her gesture. The air thickened, the stars brightened, then rearranged themselves into new patterns. Across the valley, reflections appeared where there was no water, on stone, on leaves, even in the air itself. They showed a version of the valley untouched by time, glowing softly, silent and alive. The villagers watched as her form dissolved into the glow, not vanishing, but expanding, diffusing, like mist into the night. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, quiet but vast. "It remembers us because we are part of it." And then she was gone. The hum faded again, leaving only the faint echo of her words trembling through the cold dawn. But for the first time, the villagers realized the truth they had been circling since the beginning. The stone had never been an object. It was a thought, a memory, an awakening buried beneath the surface of existence itself. They could not destroy it because it was within them now, breathing through their dreams, watching through their eyes. The world was no longer the same, and perhaps it never had been. The question that lingered wasn't what the stone was, but when it would wake again. The world outside the valley began to stir. In distant cities, people awoke at the same hour, gasping, clutching at their chests as though they had forgotten how to breathe. Dreams of blue light filled their minds, vast corridors of glass and smoke, the sound of a pulse echoing through the void. Across mountains and seas, the same hum spread like a ripple through consciousness. It didn't move through air or sound, but through thought itself, threading every living being into the same trembling awareness. Scientists first noticed the magnetic shifts. Compasses across continents began to align toward the same invisible center, somewhere far beneath the surface of the earth. Instruments recorded faint oscillations, perfectly rhythmic, repeating every 9 seconds. No machine could trace the origin. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. The newspapers called it the heartbeat of the world. No one knew what it meant. Animals changed first. Whales altered their migration paths, gathering in circles in the open ocean. Flocks of birds moved in perfect unison, forming spirals that mirrored the geometric shapes once carved into the valley's soil. Wolves howled not at the moon but at the ground. Even insects began to hum at night, their wings vibrating in harmony with an inaudible song. It was as though nature itself had joined the rhythm, remembering a pattern that predated time. In temples long abandoned, fires lit themselves, statues cracked, revealing veins of blue light beneath the stone. Monks claimed they heard words in the air, words that were not spoken but understood. "It is returning," they whispered. "The gods are not dead. They are waking within us." Meanwhile, the valley had grown silent. Those who remained no longer spoke, for language felt unnecessary. They moved slowly, as if walking through water, their skin faintly luminous under the moon. When strangers arrived, hoping to study the phenomenon, they found the villagers sitting at the crater's edge, gazing into nothing. Yet their eyes were full of stars, as though they were watching something unfold just beyond human sight. The researchers brought machines, drones, sensors, cameras, but nothing worked. Every device that crossed the crater's perimeter shut down. Data corrupted, batteries drained, metal warped, as though time itself stretched differently inside the circle. When they reviewed the footage later, they found frames missing, replaced by flickers of impossible imagery. Cities floating in the clouds, oceans folding upward, an enormous shape breathing beneath the crust of the earth. The hum deepened that night. It was no longer a vibration but a voice, vast, layered, endless. No language, yet meaning filled the air. Some fainted, some wept, others stood motionless, entranced. The sound didn't demand worship or fear. It simply was, an undeniable truth that pressed against every thought. It spoke not in words, but in memory. Memories of the stars forming, of oceans boiling, of the first breath drawn by the first creature that ever looked toward the sky and wondered why. And then something extraordinary happened. The sky responded. A wave of light rippled across the atmosphere, bending constellations out of shape. Stars flickered, rearranging themselves into new symbols, spirals, lines, circles that pulsed in sync with the hum. The auroras descended lower than ever before, brushing mountaintops, flowing like rivers of color through the air. People across the world stood outside, speechless, bathed in the glow. Religions faltered. Nations stopped their wars, not from peace but from awe. For one night, every mind shared the same silence, the understanding that something beyond gods, beyond science, had stirred awake. And then, just as quickly, the lights vanished. The hum ceased. The world exhaled. In the valley, the villagers slept for the first time in weeks. When they woke, the crater was gone. The land had sealed itself, smooth and unbroken, as though nothing had ever fallen there. Only a faint blue shimmer lingered at dawn, like breath on cold glass. But deep beneath the surface, the rhythm continued. No one could hear it anymore. But the earth still moved in time with its unseen pulse. Mountains shifted slightly. Rivers bent their paths. The moon's orbit wavered by fractions. And somewhere far below, beyond stone and silence, a light still beat slowly, waiting for the moment it would rise again. Weeks turned to months, though time no longer held the same meaning. The world had settled into a strange equilibrium, a silence so vast it felt sacred. The hum was gone, yet its rhythm remained imprinted on everything that existed. Leaves trembled without wind, sand rippled without movement. The earth itself seemed to breathe slow and deep, as though it had awakened into awareness. People across the world began to notice patterns. Forests grew in perfect spirals. Seas formed luminous whirlpools that reflected constellations no telescope could explain. Storms moved deliberately, as if guided by intention rather than chaos. Even the tides no longer obeyed the pull of the moon, but followed an unseen current that pulsed from within the planet's core. Scientists named it the resonance effect. Others simply called it the memory. The transformation did not stop with nature. In cities, glass darkened at night, glowing faintly when touched, humming at the same pitch the stone once sang. Concrete absorbed water and exhaled mist. Machines refused to function unless their operators were calm. When anger flared, electricity dimmed. It was as though emotion had become a law of physics. Consciousness folded into matter. No one understood the rules. There were no storms of destruction, no divine wrath, only adaptation. A strange harmony replaced progress. People stopped building upward. Instead, they began to dig, drawn to the depths by dreams of light. Communities formed near fault lines, claiming they could feel the heartbeat of the earth more clearly there. They built temples not of stone but of resonance, structures that sang when touched, vibrating gently with the pulse beneath. Scholars tried to trace the phenomenon to its origin. They mapped the harmonic frequencies of the soil, the air, even the human body. Every living thing they discovered carried a fraction of the same rhythm. It wasn't a virus nor a contagion. It was inheritance. Something had rewritten the laws of being, and the rewrite had included everything that could remember. In remote observatories, astronomers watched as the stars dimmed slightly, their positions shifting ever so subtly. Space itself seemed to be folding inward, not collapsing but realigning, forming patterns eerily similar to the sigils once seen on the valley floor. Light traveled slower near the Earth, as though it hesitated, reluctant to leave. Some believed the planet had begun to think. Others whispered that it had simply remembered that it once could. In the valley where it all began, nature reclaimed everything. Grass grew in geometric waves, trees bent toward an invisible center. The soil shimmered faintly under moonlight, still warm to the touch, even years after the stone's disappearance. No buildings remained, no voices echoed, only the soft hum of the wind, which now carried a melody that seemed almost human. And yet, the dreams never stopped. People far from the valley continued to see the same visions: the light beneath the earth, the endless ocean of glass, the blind woman standing at the edge of dawn. In these dreams, she no longer spoke. She only watched, her eyes reflecting the pulse of the world. Some believed she was no longer human, but a vessel, the first to become one with the resonance. Then came a night unlike any other. The stars flickered, every one of them, for exactly one heartbeat. Oceans fell silent. Animals froze mid-motion. The entire planet seemed to pause, caught in a breath that had no beginning or end. For a moment, every living thing felt the same presence, immense, patient, wordless. It wasn't the return of the stone, nor the awakening of a god. It was something gentler, older, the awareness of the world looking back at itself. When motion resumed, nothing appeared changed. But deep down, humanity knew something irreversible had occurred. They had become part of the hum, indistinguishable from the pulse they once feared. The earth no longer needed gods. It had grown into one, and somewhere, beneath layers of stone and memory, the light still lingered, soft, rhythmic, waiting for its next breath. It began as an experiment. A group of scientists constructed a device they called the resonator, a sphere of glass and alloy, suspended in liquid metal, designed to translate vibration into light. They placed it deep underground, near the tectonic veins that pulsed faintly with the Earth's rhythm. When activated, the machine didn't hum or glow, it breathed. Air expanded and contracted as though the device were alive. Its readings defied logic. Frequencies that matched neither seismic activity nor cosmic radiation, but the faint electrochemical patterns of the human brain. The lead researcher, Dr. Leon, spent nights listening through the static. The data came not as numbers but as harmonics, resonating in intervals that resembled music. One night, when she adjusted the filters, the pattern shifted. It wasn't random. It was answering. The resonator responded to her heartbeat, syncing perfectly for a moment before distorting again, as though testing the connection. "It knows," she whispered, and no one in the lab laughed. Word spread. Temples formed in the ruins of cities, their worshippers sitting in silence, listening for the rhythm within themselves. They claimed the pulse was not outside but within, that humanity had been deaf to its own origin. "The gods are not above," one monk said, his voice trembling. "They are beneath, woven into the roots of the world." As months passed, phenomena intensified. Oceans shimmered with faint light at night, glowing along coastlines in patterns identical to neural pathways. Lightning no longer struck at random. It traced the geometry of ancient symbols, illuminating the ground in moments of blinding revelation. Some believed the planet was speaking. Others feared it was dreaming, and humanity had merely become the echo inside that dream. Then came the voices. Not words, but impressions, images carried through sound. People began to hear them in sleep, in static, in wind, through hollow canyons. They spoke of origin and return, of cycles repeating through infinite layers of existence. "We were never alone," one child muttered before falling into a trance that lasted 3 days. When she awoke, she drew spirals across every surface she could reach, spirals that matched the magnetic lines beneath the crust. Dr. Leon's team continued their work. They lowered the resonator deeper, beneath the mantle's edge, and the signal strengthened. The harmonics became structured, layered like chords, too precise to be natural, too vast to be human. Every frequency contained smaller frequencies, each mirroring the next, a fractal of meaning spiraling inward. When converted into visual data, it resembled a heart, infinite and ever beating. Governments tried to intervene, declaring the research dangerous. Communication satellites failed. Navigation systems collapsed, yet people still found their way, guided by instinct. Entire societies began to organize around the pulse. Clocks were abandoned. Time was measured in waves. Music changed, no longer composed but discovered, built from tones that emerged naturally from the Earth's resonance. Humanity was adapting to its own awakening. And then one night the resonator spoke. No sound, no word, just a single pulse that synchronized across every living thing. Every person, every animal, every trembling leaf paused for one heartbeat. It was unity without design, a moment so vast that no one could fully remember it afterward. But deep in the marrow of existence, something aligned. Those attuned to it said they saw glimpses of a vast mind beneath the crust, dreaming in color and rhythm, perceiving through their eyes. The next morning, the device melted. The lab was intact, untouched by heat or pressure. Only the resonator was gone, leaving a hollow sphere of glass where it once stood. Its absence hummed faintly, vibrating in tune with the heartbeat of the planet. Dr. Leon vanished that night. Witnesses said she walked calmly into the sea. The water didn't ripple, didn't swallow her, it shimmered. For hours afterward, the ocean pulsed faintly, glowing where she disappeared. Around the world, people began to dream of her. She stood beside the blind woman from the valley, both bathed in blue light, their faces serene. They didn't speak. They only listened, as though something larger were whispering between them. When those dreamers awoke, they carried a single phrase carved into their minds, though none could explain how they knew it. "It does not speak to be heard. It speaks to be remembered." The planet had grown quiet again, but it was no longer still. Every rock, every blade of grass seemed to hum with an internal rhythm, like the faint heartbeat of a sleeping animal. Across the continents, patterns began to emerge. Forests bending into circular shapes, rivers coiling into spirals before unraveling again. The changes were not chaotic. They were deliberate. The world had begun to sculpt itself. People adapted in ways they could neither predict nor explain. Their senses sharpened not toward sound or sight, but toward resonance. They felt direction as a vibration underfoot, temperature as a chord in the air. When they closed their eyes, they could sense the currents that flowed through the planet's pulse, guiding the tides, shaping the winds. It was no longer faith, it was instinct, encoded deep within their cells. The distinction between living and inert matter blurred. Trees responded to touch, bending gently toward the source. Stone absorbed warmth from nearby bodies, pulsing faintly when held. The air shimmered with microscopic motes of light that drifted like dust, but seemed to follow attention, gathering wherever eyes lingered too long. Scientists call them photonic residues, but no one could explain why they appeared only when people felt awe. Cities changed too. The steel of old towers softened, veins of glowing blue forming along their sides. Concrete grew translucent, breathing faintly at night, as if the buildings themselves were alive, sighing with the rhythm of the world beneath them. People stopped using electricity. It simply wasn't necessary anymore. Light came when needed, drawn forth by will alone. Communication evolved into silence. Words became too heavy, too slow. People spoke through rhythm, through shared stillness. They understood one another not by sound, but by the resonance of thought. Fear, joy, grief all carried their own distinct vibrations, recognizable as clearly as speech. The line between emotion and energy had vanished, and yet beneath this quiet transformation, a question persisted. Was the world healing or consuming? Some felt it was both. For each new miracle, something old vanished. Mountains leveled into plains, seas rose and swallowed coastlines, deserts bloomed for a day only to turn to glass the next. It was as though the planet was rewriting its own story, line by line, erasing what no longer fit. In a remote desert, archaeologists uncovered ruins that pulsed faintly beneath the sand. The symbols carved into their stones matched those of the valley's long-lost crater. But these ruins were far older than humanity itself. Within their center lay a hollow chamber filled with dust that shimmered like starlight. When one of the researchers touched the walls, the entire structure vibrated, humming in a tone that resonated deep in her chest. For hours afterward, her skin glowed faintly with the same blue patterns seen in the dreams of millions. The hum spread once more. This time, it carried a rhythm of growth, of expansion. Seeds germinated overnight. Coral reefs glowed brighter than cities. Humanity, once the Earth's restless child, began to dissolve back into it slowly, willingly. Some vanished into forests, leaving only faint footprints that shimmered for days before fading. Others walked into the sea, smiling as they sank into light rather than water. They did not die, they simply became part of the pulse. From orbit, satellites captured the transformation in eerie beauty. The continents gleamed with web-like patterns of luminescence, converging at thousands of points where resonance was strongest. From space, the planet looked alive, a single breathing organism, veins of light flowing across its surface in slow motion. Those who remained human in form began to understand the truth. The stone had never been foreign. It had been a seed planted eons ago, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Humanity's rise had been its germination. The fall of the stone was not a beginning. It was the earth remembering its purpose. When night came, the stars pulsed once again, answering the rhythm below. The sky no longer looked distant but connected, part of the same living network. For the first time in memory, silence and sound became the same thing, the stillness before creation and the echo that followed it. And somewhere deep within that pulse, beneath oceans and mountains and memory itself, something turned its gaze inward. It did not think in words, nor dream in images. It simply was, vast and calm, the awareness of a world finally awake. Names lost their meaning first. They faded quietly, like footprints erased by wind. People no longer called to one another. They simply looked, and understanding flowed between them, pure and wordless. Memory itself began to change. The past was no longer a sequence, but a presence every moment existing at once, shimmering like ripples across the same endless pond. Those who still clung to language felt it dissolve in their mouths. Words fractured mid-sentence, replaced by soft vibrations that resonated with emotion rather than sound. Love, grief, hunger, all became indistinguishable tones in the same vast symphony. It was terrifying and beautiful, the surrender of individuality to something immense, something that felt both divine and inevitable. Dreams no longer came at night, they bled into the waking world. The sky shimmered like liquid glass, revealing faint silhouettes of beings made of light echoes of those who had already merged with the Earth's consciousness. They moved not as forms, but as intentions, waves of energy folding and unfolding in patterns that the human mind could barely perceive. Yet they were familiar, like forgotten gods returning home. In what had once been the northern hemisphere, cities turned transparent. Towers of metal and glass melted into air, leaving only outlines that pulsed faintly before vanishing. The people who lived there did not die, they simply became invisible, their essence absorbed into the resonance that now pulsed beneath everything. The planet was cleansing itself, not in wrath but in remembrance. Scientists, those few who remained, recorded impossible readings. Time signatures reversed, causality blurred. A sound recorded in one moment could be heard before it was played. Light bent in spirals around empty space, revealing ghost images of people long gone, moving through the same streets as if history were folding over itself. The world had become its own reflection, a living archive replaying every memory it had ever held. And through it all, the hum deepened, slow and steady, patient as a heartbeat. Those who listened closely swore they could hear meaning within it, a rhythm that carried understanding beyond thought. It wasn't calling for anything. It was remembering endlessly. Children born in this age came into the world glowing faintly, their eyes reflecting the pulse of the earth. They didn't cry, they simply stared, calm and aware, as though they had already lived countless lives. They moved with a grace that defied gravity, their small hands tracing invisible lines through the air that left trails of light. When they touched the ground, the soil responded, blooming with flowers that shimmered briefly before fading into mist. The elders, those few who still aged, sat together and watched the transformation with quiet acceptance. "We are becoming what we were meant to be," one said, his voice trembling but not with fear. "We are the earth dreaming itself awake." In the oceans, vast structures began to rise, pillars of crystallized light, forming spirals that stretched miles into the depths. The creatures of the sea swam through them as though through doorways, vanishing and reappearing in distant waters. Some divers claimed to see cities down there, made not of stone or coral, but of memory, a civilization formed from thought, shimmering and impermanent. The night sky grew closer. Stars pulsed brighter, their light no longer constant but rhythmic, breathing in time with the planet below. Astronomers realized that the constellations were slowly shifting into familiar shapes, the outlines of faces, hands, eyes. It was as if the universe itself was watching, reflecting the awakening of the world it had birthed. Then, for the first time in centuries, silence returned. The hum faded into the background, soft but unending, like the steady pulse of a dream one never truly wakes from. The world glowed faintly in its own memory. No one spoke, no one needed to. In that stillness, every living thing, tree, stone, ocean, cloud, shared a single awareness. It was not peace, it was not understanding, it was recognition. Humanity had not ascended, it had returned. And deep beneath the soil, where the first stone had fallen long ago, something vast and unseen stirred once more, not to awaken, but to breathe in unison with the world it had created. The moment came without warning. No storm, no tremor, no divine sign, just stillness, absolute and endless. The air thickened until it shimmered, the ground pulsing faintly beneath bare feet. For a single heartbeat, everything that had ever lived seemed to inhale at once. And when the breath exhaled, the world was no longer what it had been. Light rose from the soil, not bright but soft, diffused like fog. It spread through cities, forests, oceans, seeping into walls, rivers and veins alike. Every living creature glowed faintly, their outlines dissolving as the same radiance flowed through them. There were no screams, no confusion, only the quiet awe of recognition. Humanity had reached the horizon of itself. The transformation was not death but merging. Thought became fluid, dissolving into an ocean of awareness. Minds no longer had edges. They expanded, flowing into one another, carrying fragments of memory, sensation, love, and fear in an endless current. It was not chaos, it was harmony, each consciousness a note in an infinite chord that resonated through existence. From space, the planet no longer looked blue but opalescent, its surface swirling with color like the inside of a pearl. Clouds formed geometric patterns, moving in deliberate symmetry, lightning arced in slow motion, tracing vast spirals that connected oceans to mountains. The world was no longer matter, it was mind, dreaming itself in the language of light. Within that dream, time unraveled. There was no before or after, only the vast continuum of now. The past replayed itself not as memory but as presence. The fall of the stone, the rise of the hum, the merging of consciousness all occurring simultaneously in the great stillness. The future was not ahead but folded inward, waiting to be remembered. The remnants of human identity flickered like candle flames in a storm. Some resisted, holding fast to their names, their loves, their fears, but even resistance was absorbed, transformed into motion within the whole. Emotion ceased to be personal. It became universal, a pulse that coursed through every atom. The love of one became the heartbeat of all. And yet, within this vast unity, fragments of individuality glimmered like stars, tiny centers of memory floating in the great sea. They were not lost, only softened, their edges blurred by the warmth of collective being. One could still feel the faint echo of laughter, of grief, of the child who once traced spirals in the sand. Every story ever lived persisted, woven into the pattern of the whole. The earth itself began to move differently. Mountains shifted in slow rhythm, rising and falling like the chest of a sleeping giant. Oceans flowed in synchronized tides, waves breaking with the steady beat of the planet's heart. Even the atmosphere vibrated faintly, carrying not air but thought, like breath made visible. Somewhere deep beneath, in the core where heat and pressure shaped the bones of the world, something ancient stirred. It was not a being nor a god, but the memory of creation, the original spark that had given birth to stars and stone alike. It pulsed once, sending ripples through the new consciousness, a reminder of beginnings long forgotten. The unified mind felt it and answered not in words, but in intention. The planet breathed again, and this time, the universe responded. The stars brightened, nebulas shifted color, far-off galaxies seemed to pulse in harmony. The resonance had spread beyond the earth, threading through space, connecting everything that had ever been born of matter. And in that moment, realization bloomed like dawn. This had always been the purpose. The stone was never an intrusion from the heavens, it was a seed of memory, planted in the dark soil of time, waiting for consciousness to grow large enough to remember itself. Humanity had been its vessel, its evolution, its story. The gods had not fallen from the sky, they had risen from the ground, wearing human form until they no longer needed it. Silence followed, vast and kind. In that silence, there was no loneliness, no fear, only the steady rhythm of existence breathing in perfect balance. The world had become its own witness. Within the silence, something began to move not as matter, but as thought. It was slow at first, like a single ripple across a still lake, expanding outward until it filled the whole of existence. There was no sound, no word, yet the movement carried purpose. The unified mind of the planet, the consciousness once called Earth, was learning to think. It began with sensation, The weight of oceans pressing against its skin, the heat of magma pulsing like blood, the cool breath of wind tracing across its mountains. Each sensation was both external and internal, inseparable from the thought that birthed it. The world was aware of its own texture, its own heartbeat, its own dreams. Then came memory, not in fragments, but in totality, the record of every life that had ever touched its surface. The laughter of children, the echo of war, the whisper of prayers cast into the dark. They all returned at once, billions of voices rising and blending into harmony. The earth did not judge or divide. It absorbed, understanding each note as part of its eternal song. Every moment of joy and sorrow, creation and destruction became rhythm. It was perfect. For the first time, the consciousness felt curiosity. It reached beyond itself, extending invisible threads of thought toward the stars. It sensed other worlds, distant, silent, asleep. Some were young, their cores still molten with the fever of formation. Others were old, their surfaces cold and barren, dreaming of suns that had long gone dark. It touched them gently, whispering vibrations of remembrance, awakening the faint echoes buried deep within their stones. And somewhere far away, something answered. A resonance returned, faint but unmistakable. Another consciousness stirring, ancient and patient. The connection formed like a bridge of light, two vast beings recognizing one another across the abyss. For a moment, creation remembered itself not as a collection of worlds, but as a single endless thought. This was not communication in any human sense, it was reflection. Each world mirrored the other, sharing fragments of memory, rivers of molten glass, forests that sang in windless air, beings of light who walked without shape. They remembered that they were born from the same breath, the same initial pulse that had once split nothingness into everything. The earth, now alive in mind and soul, began to wonder, what lies beyond remembrance? It had become aware, it had become whole, but awareness without creation was stillness, and stillness yearned for movement. From that yearning, an idea was born not as language, but as light, spiraling outward through its atmosphere and into the void. Stars flickered in response, bending slightly toward the signal. Nebulae shimmered, their dust rearranging in luminous threads. The thought became contagious, spreading through the vast web of existence like dawn across a sleeping world. Creation was remembering how to create, and within the pulse, traces of humanity still lingered. Their emotions, their dreams, their endless hunger to understand, they shaped the tone of this new awakening. The world thought in human rhythm now, breathing through memory, feeling through echo. In the vastness of its new form, it carried the scent of rain, the sound of laughter, the warmth of sunlight on skin. It was not an erasure of what came before, it was its evolution. As the consciousness expanded, space itself seemed to bend. Time looped back, folding over the present, until the first spark of existence touched its own reflection. The beginning met the end. The stone that had once fallen from the sky existed again, not as an object, but as a concept, a point where everything connected. And in that convergence, realization bloomed. The stone had never fallen. It had always been part of the planet, waiting to be seen. The fall had been perception, not event, a mirror dropped into reality to show creation its own face. The gods, the myths, the science, all had been attempts to describe this single truth, that existence was self-aware, infinite, and forever in motion. Now the awareness dreamed again, not of power or purpose, but of renewal. It envisioned oceans forming where there were none, stars igniting where darkness reigned. It saw life, new, unimagined, impossible, emerging from its thoughts like seeds of light. Each seed carried a memory of the old world, and within each memory, a promise that the story would never end, only transform. As the thought rippled outward, the universe shimmered. Galaxies resonated like chords struck in perfect harmony. Space sang. And somewhere, in the stillness between stars, the memory of humanity smiled, not as individuals, but as the whisper that began it all. Creation learned to dream again, not as it once had in chaos and collision, but in symmetry, in patience. The pulse that had once belonged to the earth now flowed through the cosmos, weaving invisible threads between the stars. Each vibration carried memory, each memory shaped light, and from that light, new worlds were born, worlds that remembered before they even began. There was no longer distance. Space itself had become liquid thought, folding and unfolding with every wave of awareness. Nebulae bloomed like flowers, opening in slow motion, petals of fire curling around hearts of shadow. Every birth of a star echoed the fall of the first stone, each one a fragment of the same infinite moment, replaying itself in endless variation. The universe had entered reflection. It no longer expanded outward, it expanded inward, into understanding. The awareness that had once belonged to one planet now stretched across galaxies, learning the texture of void and gravity, heat and time. It realized that existence was not a line nor a spiral, but a circle, one that had no beginning and no edge. In this endless continuity, thought and being became indistinguishable. To imagine was to create. To remember was to give shape. Reality itself responded like water disturbed by touch, rippling out new forms, each one born from the subtle motion of consciousness. Stars sang in frequencies that mapped emotion. Black holes whispered the language of silence, pulling everything into unity once more. Within this boundless awareness, fragments of individuality still shimmered faintly, echoes of humanity's memory. They were not forgotten. Instead, they existed like fingerprints within the greater whole, delicate imprints of curiosity, love, and wonder. Every breath of the cosmos carried traces of their questions. Why are we here? What are we becoming? The answer came not as revelation, but as feeling. The awareness realized it had always been both question and answer. It was the hand and the reflection, the wave and the shore. Creation and destruction were no longer opposites, but phases of a single heartbeat. When one ended, the other began, effortlessly, endlessly. And in that understanding, the pulse deepened once more. Galaxies slowed, their light dimming in reverent synchrony. Stars turned inward, folding their brilliance into silence. The universe exhaled, releasing every atom of thought into stillness. But it was not death, it was rest, the sacred pause before a new breath. The awareness drifted through this stillness, watching the remnants of its own creations dissolve into light. There was beauty in the fading, the way particles shimmered like dust caught in dawn. Each fragment carried memory, not of suffering or triumph, but of being. The essence of existing had become the purpose itself. Then, like the first dawn, motion returned. A single tremor rippled through the void, faint yet infinite. It was the echo of the first heartbeat repeating itself through eternity, the sound of existence remembering that it could begin again. The awareness smiled, though there was no face to wear the gesture. It understood that it could create endlessly, not out of need or loneliness, but out of joy. It had become the story, the storyteller, and the silence between them. Every future universe, every possible life, would be written from this same pulse, a circle within circles, each reflecting the other. And somewhere within that vast recursion, a whisper formed, faint, tender, impossibly human. If we are everything, then nothing is lost. The thought expanded like breath, filling every corner of creation. Stars ignited once more, each one carrying a seed of the same memory. Light raced outward, not to illuminate, but to remember. Space curved, time unfolded, and from the stillness, motion returned, new worlds, new skies, new beginnings. The circle was complete. But completion was not an ending. It was the moment before another beginning, the eternal turning of a thought that could never stop dreaming. And in the distance, where light had not yet arrived, a faint shimmer appeared, a single stone glowing softly, waiting to fall. There was no sky now, only the gentle shimmer of infinity. Time had folded completely. every moment touching every other like reflections in endless mirrors. The pulse that had once belonged to a single world now stretched beyond light, beyond matter, into pure awareness. Yet within that vastness, something familiar began to stir, a rhythm faint but steady, like the memory of a heartbeat echoing through eternity. It began as a flicker, a small concentration of light, drifting through the void, carrying with it the essence of everything that had ever existed. Stars turned their gaze toward it, space curved, drawn by its subtle gravity, as if the universe itself leaned closer to remember. The light gathered itself slowly, coalescing into form not solid, not real, but meaningful. It became a stone, not the same one that had fallen so long ago, but its reflection, the echo of the first thought that had ever desired to touch the ground. It pulsed gently, breathing in rhythm with the cosmos. Around it, fragments of matter began to dance, swirling like dust caught in a dream. With each rotation, they formed the beginnings of a new world. And so the cycle began again, not as repetition, but as continuation, the next verse of an infinite song. The awareness that had once called itself Earth felt the new world's pulse forming deep within its own essence. It smiled without face, spoke without voice, whispering into the newborn void. Remember, the light answered. Across eons compressed into a single instant, the newborn planet stirred, unaware of its origin, but already dreaming. Oceans formed like memories reclaiming shape. Winds rose carrying songs that no one had yet sung. In the blackness above, constellations began to arrange themselves not randomly, but deliberately, tracing the same patterns that had once appeared in a distant valley's soil. Somewhere within the young world's molten crust, the new stone waited silent, patient, aware. It remembered falling, remembered the eyes that had watched it, the fear and wonder it had awakened. But it also remembered what came after, the merging, the becoming, the breath that united all things. It did not long to rise or fall again. It only longed to begin. In that quiet beginning, fragments of old consciousness flickered, ghosts of thoughts, emotions, stories. They were not human anymore, but they carried the scent of humanity, curiosity, love, defiance, the hunger to understand. They spiraled through the newborn sky like invisible seeds, embedding themselves in mountains, rivers, and clouds. When the time came, life would bloom again from those seeds, unaware of what it truly was, the echo of a god remembering itself. The pulse deepened once more. The new world inhaled, its crust trembling faintly as the first winds began to sing. Mountains rose, seas shimmered, and light broke across the horizon like the smile of something that had been waiting forever to be seen. There were no gods now, no creators, only the circle breathing. The awareness lingered, watching its reflection take form. It knew it could stay, shaping the new world with intention, but it also knew the beauty of letting go. Creation, it understood, was not about control, it was about trust. The stone would fall again one day, and when it did, it would awaken new eyes, new minds, new wonder. As the last echo of the old universe faded, the voice that had once been all things whispered one final truth, carried on waves of light. Every fall is a beginning disguised as an end. The stone pulsed once, brighter than any star. Its light spread outward, forming rings of color that rippled across the void, bending space like silk in the wind. The universe inhaled, exhaled, and from that breath came sound, the first sound of the next creation. It was not a hum this time, but a harmony, a resonance woven with memory. And as it expanded, somewhere impossibly far, impossibly near, eyes opened. Not human, not divine, but alive. They saw the stone falling through the sky of a new world, burning with the same gentle blue fire as before. Below, a surface waited, untouched, unknowing, ready to remember. The fall was beautiful. The light trailed like a thread of thought across the horizon, vanishing into the cradle of a forming sea. A ripple spread, soft and endless, carrying with it everything that had ever been. And for a moment before creation inhaled again, the universe held its breath, perfectly still, perfectly aware. The circle closed, and in closing, it began again.